Prep Podcast. We're here with Coach Carolyn Wester. And I know, Carolyn, we were talking just a couple days ago. You had mentioned that you had gotten a few inquiries from coaches talking about or asking you about how they might bring some of these techniques as far as body leveraging and introduce that to their team. And selfishly, I've been around body leveraging for a long time as well, and I've had many of these questions myself. So I'm actually excited for this conversation because I'm going to take away a lot about how to take some of these things and use them with my team as well. So talk a little bit about how some of the options that coaches have as they look to introduce some of these techniques to their own teams.
Well, it's a pretty exciting time to be talking about this because there has been so much evidence recently, or so much body leveraging math-based sequential muscle order technique showing up in major tournaments, collegiate and high school around and middle school around the country. So I think the biggest myth that everyone has about learning how to body leverage is that it's hard to learn. Coaches see it and they believe that it's going to be hard for their athletes to learn and that they're going to be disheartened. And we have found that it's actually not hard for them to learn, and they feel excited because immediately they could feel the difference and the results of their technique. So there's several ways to teach your organization or to teach a group of students or people in your jiu-jitsu gym or wherever you are how to body leverage. I think there's two choices or two and a half choices. One, you can have me or someone who is accredited, credentialed in body leveraging, someone that we've accredited, and have them come to your organization and in a 2-day period, teach everyone as much as they can and start the process. But that is really hard to do. And in those couple of days of teaching, it seems overwhelming because it's so much information. I find that the best way to teach is by body leveraging and its correlating technique. So if you have a team and on this day, you're going to work on a double or outside single drive up or even a high C, learn doing the pieces of body leveraging that correspond to using your body correctly to shoot, to optimize it to the maximum, to make your shot so strong. If you teach it with the technique, they get excited because they realize it's going to help them do what they're trying to do. And then you can take that piece, put it into your warm up or your warm up time slot and begin adding that in on a basis. And then when you're working on legs in, you're on top, your opponent's on bottom. You take the pieces of body leveraging that correlate to those sequential muscle orders and teach that. And then teach it, and they could try it. They could put their legs in and use the technique, and then they could do the body leveraging movement with all the muscles activated and do the technique again, and they're going to see a significant difference. And then they're excited when you add it in the next layer of body leveraging that you could do in the warm-up time slot.
Yeah.
And you keep going through the technique. And that is, basically, as you know, the course breaks down some technique by body leveraging. It's easy to understand, but that is the best way to teach it. What I find is that so many people have like they just want to check off the box. This is a new greatest thing, or this is something that's going to help their athletes, or one of their fellow coaches, or maybe a parent of an athlete has seen it and they want to try it, and they just want to check the box. They're not really trying to learn it or teaching it with the expectation of it helping. I had not too long ago, I was working with some athletes I work with all the time, and they had a guest with them. And the guest is actually doing about 1/4 of the body leveraging movements correctly. And I asked him, and he's a Super 32 champ, and I asked him where he learned it. And he said, oh, we do it at this practice. And I looked to the coach in the room and he said, he said, so and so runs that practice and he must have shown them. And the athlete said, yes, that's what happened. But in actuality, that person had only witnessed body leveraging being taught about, a couple of hours. And I think maybe his wife filmed some of it. But what he didn't get was the exact muscle order, how it corresponds to technique.
Right.
So those group of people, they have a really great warm up that's, athletic
Hmm.
and a little gymnasticsy because they're not executing it for technique.
Right.
So I think how you teach it and what you expect makes a big difference. And you realize that it's like everything, it's not going to be quick. And
Right.
right now it's kind of interesting. Cornell University wrestled Missouri yesterday, and Joshua Saunders beat his opponent. He wrestles for Cornell. He's a Missouri, two-time Missouri state champ and
Right.
three-time world team member, Super
Yeah. Yeah.
32 champ, Walsh Jesuit champ. And I'm cutting it short, but someone in the media put together a video, and he said it to me, and he said, Coach, I need you to add on video of Joshua doing body leveraging because anybody who's seen body leveraging
Yeah.
knows that Josh has been with you since 2011. No, that's how he won that match. Did you see that match?
No, I saw well, I saw the reel and recognized a lot of the wide leg, a lot of the body leveraging in that
Over
sequence
under.
immediately. Yeah, yeah. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, it's very cool. So, and then, we just this past, I was at the Powerade, Powerade tournament a few weeks ago at Cannon Mac, and Robert Kucharzik, who's going to Harvard next year. He wrestles for Lake Highland Prep. He's been there for 2 years. He won in the finals, and he was out there body leveraging. He wide legged. He
Hmm.
did a series of movement that he's learned with me, and I have worked with him since he was 7 years old. And that sounds like to the ear that is a very immersive experience. But in actuality, it wasn't. I worked with Robert during his club season. He wrestled for the Bandits in Northern Virginia. I worked with him there. He came to camp. He came to Poway. He came to camp when in Virginia. He
Hmm.
went with me to Gilroy. But these, when you add all that time together, it's maybe a year and a half of coaching
Hmm.
every other day. But still, from that time frame, and he was at camp last summer too for a week. Here it is again. Even Mike Palazzo was kidding with me, and he said, if when Robert wins this, I hope you all have some choreographed exhibition for him to do body leveraging because he knows it's made a difference. Knows he's made a difference. Same time, Trojan Wars comes up, and you have Jordan Manette, who was a Fargo third place finisher last year. And Jordan in the semis over unders
Hmm.
and wins the match. And his mom actually sent me the video and said, he told me to send this to you, something about an under over. And
Yeah.
but here he is, here he is using it in his match. And then that shows up. And then also at the Powerade, there were a lot of athletes who I've worked with at Powerade, but I'm just talking about the finals. Chewy Botello from Wyoming Seminary. Chewy was wrestling Jax Forrest, and Jax won the match, but Chewy startled him because he would put his knees forward and move into Jax in a way, and you could tell by Jax's reaction that that was uncommon for him.
Yeah.
But I know knees forward, moving forward,
Hmm.
is something that I worked with Chewy and the Descena boys and a lot of people with. And then we roll into Melvin Miller from Bishop McCord. I've only worked with Melvin briefly. I was up at Bishop McCord in the preseason, and I spent a couple of days there, about a week there, working with them. But one thing we talked about was hip under, over, hip under, and in defense for tilts and for a series of movements. And in the finals, Alessio Periton, who was number one in the country from Del Barton, pulls Melvin over, and Melvin, you see him, he's just like pushing, And it was almost like he wanted to kick over, and I could see that would not work. Alessio, he's so great. He would just, and he's such a great guy. And Coach Frost is such a great coach. But Alessio would have pulled him, but with Melvin, instead of kicking over, he pulled his hip under and was able to reverse the position. And when the match was over, he had won the match. And so all these things are going on at Powerade. Then I get this video clip from the Desert Duels in Las Vegas, and Ian Miller, who wrestles for Marymount University, over unders for the win in one of his matches. And then this past weekend, he wrestled in I think it's called the Jim Kreitzer at WNL, and he put knees down at 90 and human geometry, and he sent me those clips to show me, how he did there and how all of that is going. And that's just the athletes that are telling me what's going
And all
on.
in the last week or week and a half, right?
Yeah, last week and a half, right? Just the last week and a half. And you even think back to Will Dieter, Jordan Manette's teammate at Trinity in Pennsylvania. He was a Fargo champ this year and a Fargo All-American, and he won in freestyle. And he said, we did an interview, and he said, I won that by two reasons. I was down, I think, 0-7, the beginning of the second period. He said, one, since I work with Coach every week online, I can stay in an L-level stance for a good 7 to 10 minutes, and I can't be moved. So I wasn't nervous. He said, when I was down. And he said he ended up, the winning shot was a trail leg shot, and that is full, very specific body leveraging movement,
Right.
including all the trajectory producing and torque producing forward motion, as well as how to rotate your weight on your lead foot, how to move to get that trail leg up and as far as it can while your body remains parallel and able to impact your opponent at the key moment. So we have Will, that's he and Jordan are teammates and workout partners. And then we just got back from Tulsa kickoff in December, and Jacob Saunders, little Mo Worthy Jr., and Bryce Fiore all won and all executed some components of body leveraging in their matches. Jacob has wrestled with me. This is the perfect example. Jacob has wrestled with me from the very first moment he learned to wrestle. His dad, Nolan, knew from Joshua's success, starting with me around 2011, that he wasn't going to start Jacob learning technique until he could use his body correctly. So Jacob, has been with us a really long time, right? Forever and ever. And then Mo Worthy Jr., he started with me about January or February of 2024. And I've worked with him, maybe if we put it all together, maybe a month and a half, if it was, everyday consecutive practice. And then Bryce Fiore, when I was in Florida, which I want to say was in November or late October, thanks to Coach Baldwin, Fox Baldwin had me down, and I worked with Bryce. And here we are at Tulsa kickoff, and he puts his knees forward and runs through. And so all of those athletes had different amounts of exposure. All of those athletes still could execute what they learned. So I want to share that, so people who believe that it takes a lot of time or you have to do it a long time for it to be effective, that's not really the case. It's how it's taught to them and the expectation that they're going to do it. When I work with an athlete and I ask them maybe to back handspring or back handspring split shoot, back handspring to the stance shoot, front handspring to the stance, back handspring catch their foot. The way I look at them and react makes all the difference. If I go, it might be hard, you're going to be scared, it's going to be difficult, then it's going to be all those things.
Yeah.
If I am stoic and I look like my expectation is they can do it, and I'm like, I give them the muscle order, 95% of the time, they do some percentage of the movement, and they're so amazed that they can do it, that it makes a difference. It's kind of ironic, you know, you want to talk about the old school athletes. There's an athlete who's at UVA now who wrestled for Buchanan, Jack Geoffrey. And when Jack was a senior, he and his brother Michael both won the state tournament. And Michael Geoffrey's match was part of a big brouhaha about the reffing. It was all over Flow. There's like 3 or 4 Flow podcasts about it. But his mom and Jack messaged me immediately and said, Coach, you won this state title for Jack. And here Jack is a senior and living in Clovis. And when he was in 2011 and 12, he lived in Modesto, which was about an hour and a half from me. And they would come every week. Here they all came, Michael, Jack, and Logan. And I taught him how to go backwards, split, land on his butt and push back, and how to control from the splits and not be taken down from that split position because he has the correct sequential muscle order. It's unmovable. And here, I don't know how many years later, because when I look at those 2011 to maybe it was 2021, 22, I think he's a sophomore now at UVA. That's a long time.
Right.
But he knew and his mother knew, and I said that was that. And you look even now, Aaron Gandara, who is so beautiful to watch wrestle, is at Southern Oregon, and we still see Aaron Gandara executing. It's so much a part of the fabric of what he does is that people don't know how to describe it. I remember when he first moved from Cibola to Poway, we were wrestling somewhere and someone in the Central Valley, Clovis West, Buchanan said to me, a coach, he's just really athletic, but his technique is all over the place. But what they didn't recognize or understand was that was choreographed sequential muscle order.
Right.
And that was his technique. That is his technique. And over time, I think they understood that. But when somebody doesn't understand it,
Right.
they immediately have to label it, or a lot of people feel the need to label it as something it's not. And then, there's, inevitably Chris Greason's name comes up, who, lives in California and wrestles in California. But I coached for 8 years consecutively, 3 years of him being, right with me for everyday practice. And there are, I think between those 3 years, he had 122 wins in high school matches as a 7th and 8th grader, and maybe 35 losses in there. We maybe got 10 or 15 middle school matches based on the tournament where we couldn't go up. But you can watch almost any video of Chris during that time frame and see him execute an incredible amount of body leveraging sequential math order technique. And I think the culminating video of him was in 2024 in the CIF sectional tournament in California. He's wrestling Leo Cantino, who won Doc B's the other night. And he is on bottom, and Chrissy baits him to put his leg in, and then Chrissy over-unders and goes and pins him. And it was just the look on, it was in the first period, and the look on everyone's faces was, you could just see the Buchanan coaches' faces, and they're all, such great men and women associated with that program. But it's just because they just had no idea that was possible. And for Chrissy, that's what he had done, for a very long time. And that list goes on and on. I mean, all the athletes you knew as growing up, and, there's so many in college today. I feel like if I asked, could you please send me, we would get, well, Tayshawn Glover, North Dakota State. He's been coming for 2 years. He was with us last year and the year before, and came to Northern North Carolina when I was doing a clinic. And he was just, whatever it is on the week for Flow, collegiate upset of the week or some organization. And he friggin' put his knees in and ran through the guy, amongst other things to win. That wasn't the shining moment, but he was executing body leveraging. And I just want people to understand or get that you can teach this.
Right.
It's doesn't matter if you have long time exposure to me or short time exposure. It doesn't matter if you want to learn it all at once or you want to learn it in bits and pieces. It's gonna be there. And I posted a video a few weeks ago of, I can't even remember who it was. Oh, it was a compilation video from 2022. It had Logan Ritchie, who wrestles at Duke, Christy, Isaiah Fenton at Iowa, Kaizen Totolis, Vince Schmidt, who's ranked #1 now in Minnesota. Both the Odiotti brothers, who are both Fargo champs. Massey's now at Northwestern. And somebody, commented that this is either the craziest snake oil scheme, or in 10 years, this is going to be the way everyone wrestles. He said, and that is sort of, I've heard that before too. I've heard Rob Cole not say it like that, but indicate. I used to have people call me and say, hey, my son may be going to Stanford, he may be going to Cornell, but Coach Cole suggested he spend some time with you. Or, I've been included on emails where a coach has inquired or asked him for suggestions, and he's laid my name out there as an incredible source in his opinion for what they were trying to accomplish. So, I'm pretty excited about all that's going on, but I want people to understand how easy it actually is to teach this information.
I like that right off the bat you linked body leveraging to wrestling technique and actually scoring points in wrestling. I think that's where a lot of people miss the connection there, where they might have a gymnastic like warm up, as you mentioned earlier, and do some things that look athletic at the beginning, but those are just tricks if they're not directly connected to something that they're doing on the mat. And so there's nothing wrong with
No, I
being
applaud.
more athletic and doing those things, but the fact that you have direct connections between the things that you're doing in body leveraging to moves that score points in matches, whether that be in wrestling or jiu-jitsu or any combat grappling
No, you heard Michael Pixley when we had him on the podcast.
Yep.
Say that, I mean, he actually, he's not a very loquacious person. And remember how he started giggling? And he's like,
No,
he's like, oh, the wide leg. He's like, every athlete should learn how to do that. It was kind of interesting. It was kind of interesting at, remember what you're going to say, at Doc B's in the finals, there was an athlete and I've never worked with him, but about 40 people texted me and said, did you see so-and-so trying to do something we do? And the person he was wrestling, I guess I started working with when he was maybe 5 years old, and he immediately caught it and moved his foot out of the way. So he knew what was coming down, and he moved his foot out of the way. So he wouldn't be in that situation. But anyway, you were going to say something.
I liked your suggestion. I felt good that I've kind of stumbled upon that as a way to teach with with my team as well, that we incorporate some of the body leveraging at the beginning of practice in some of the warm up, especially if it's directly connected to some of the technique we'll be working on that day. If we're working on leg attacks, then we're definitely going to be doing something with a split shoot at the beginning of the warm up, just to ingrain that pattern of movement as we move on to the shots. When we're working on, we were just doing a stand up the other day, kind of cleaning up some things with their stand up on bottom, and we were doing some wide legs at the beginning because that's one of the ways they need to be cutting away and looking to attack right off of that. And so doing those things at the beginning of practice ingrains that muscle movement, and then they can think about incorporating that and also focus on some of the other things that they should be doing during the match if some of these movements are automatic.
Yeah, it's after Powerade the next day I was staying in Swickley, PA, and the Richie's boys, I think Logan wrestles at Duke.
Hmm.
Justin Russell's at Gettysburg, and Marcus is getting ready to commit. So he's had two choices he's come down to. But we went down to their facility in OMP, which is a successful wrestling club in PA.
Yep.
Their coach was down there, and their high school coach is the same person. And Coach Heinel was down there. Austin was working with people and doing some privates, and I was working with the boys. And then I heard him say, "Oh, you're going to second story pivot." And actually, I learned that from Coach Carolyn, and then I was able to, so, Austin was on the ground helping him, being the opponent, but he couldn't see what the athlete was doing. And I was able to go over and show him just a little bit more about how to get his body around. And that's, what's crazy. So a lot of coaches catch the pieces when it affects technique. When they see
Right.
the
Yep.
technique, then they get excited about it, and they don't then they're excited to teach it. Something I wanted to say before about programs. I don't know if it's still the way it was, but years ago when Steve Tirapelli was still actively coaching at Clovis, and Adam, um, I think he was the head coach before Gabe Schaefer came in and took over. Um, every year they would have in the summer, they would have weekly training for their wrestlers that were playing football. And one week would be like leg riding, and one week would be bottom, and one would be shooting, etc. And it would be so easy if you're one of these types of programs that's incredibly structured, and just a dynasty year after year after year, to say, we're going to slide one weekend that's going to be sequential muscle order
Hmm.
for technique, and have somebody, like me come, or somebody else, who's been certified in body leveraging come, and, teach that to them, or
Right.
expose that to them. Then it already becomes part of what they're doing. It's okay to invest that type of energy into making them optimized, because everything else they learn is going to be easier for them to do and
Yeah.
executed at a much higher value rate than probably what they would do if they just learned it however they're learning it.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing you had said that I wanted to highlight as well, mostly because I had this thought myself when first exposed to some of your Instagram stuff and looking at videos on, it was YouTube back then. I don't even know if Instagram was a thing when I met you 15 years
I'm
ago
sure
or
I
so,
wasn't using it correctly if it was.
but it's very easy, I think, to see some of the things that kids coached by you are doing, some of the back handsprings and going across the mat, and some of the athleticism that they're able to express and think that and I've heard this from other coaches, and I've thought this myself at times, that my kids can't do that. They're not that athletic, and because I've seen it. I've seen you coach kids and some of those kids that I see in reels now, I knew 5, 6, 7 years ago, and they were not that athletic to start with, right? But they worked on it, and they became, very good at these
Well, who's
movements.
who's the A number one person you and I know who wasn't that athletic, who became great at it?
I mean, Drew, probably
Drew.
right away, and even
Yeah, Drew
Ian,
Morgan.
and a lot of the guys that are wrestling in college now, I saw earlier in their careers, and they stuck with it, and the fact that, and you said it, and I was glad to hear you. I've watched you do it, but the way that you explain the fact that you demonstrate there, you have an athlete demonstrate the movement, you explain how to do it, and you just have this expectation that you're going to do that. And they usually are able to, everyone I've seen, even the least athletic kid that's in the room, can do some semblance of what you're describing. It's not perfect, but it's a start, and then that's where the coaching begins, right? Is I expect you to attempt this thing that, but like you said, if you start out with, this is going to be hard, most people don't get this the first try, and then they start to make excuses for themselves if it's just expected that this is what we do. And like I said, I've watched you run practices that way, and everyone is at a different place as far as their ability to do the movements in a way that is constructive, and coaching occurs at every level. Though there are you're well, that's which is great to watch you run a practice in that way, that you have things that you can do to help those that are very good at the movements already to refine the small details. But then you're also able to, and this is important in every coach, to be able to dial it back to those that are just beginning, to say, well, here are the big things, or a couple of big things that you can do to get way better at that, and then we'll focus on the details. But everyone in here
Yes.
is capable, and we're all doing this, and just by having that attitude, I think allows people to make or the athletes to make a lot more progress than they would, because like I said, it's really easy as a coach to watch some of the videos of some of your more advanced wrestlers and think, well, my kids will never be able to do that.
Yeah, I have like two things I want to say about that. One, it is important that you, as a coach, engage with your athletes in a way where you're going to share with them how to work in sequential muscle order instead of trying to imagine it in their brain.
Mhm.
Everybody's seen an athlete go out there in wrestling and do something, and the coach will say, well, what exactly was that? Either abruptly or with humor, or you're an abrupt parent. And they usually say, well, that's how I saw it in my brain. And it doesn't always work. They watch somebody's videos and they've not broken down their movement, and they haven't had somebody actually explain the movement to them. And so they just throw themselves at it. So I like working with people often when I don't have a demo person with me, because they're the athletes who get it the quickest,
Hmm.
because they are dependent on doing exactly the muscle order I'm saying to do the piece of body leveraging or the sequential muscle order.
Okay. They're
Today we had
contracting
an
muscles
athlete,
instead of mimicking a
instead
form.
of mimicking, because
Yeah.
mimicking brings in, you can mimic a isometric position. That's you could get in the isometric position and hold, mimicking, and then talk about what muscles you should be coordinating. But to make a movement, you need to execute by the muscle order. And this morning, out of the blue, a family of athletes I work with had a visitor, and they were going to a local tournament, and I had one slot open, and they slid in. And that athlete was 11 years old, and he's very good for the state he's from, multiple time state champ, etc.
Mhm.
And I was explaining what we were going to do. Ben was there harder. So Ben, could demo it. And he started to, you know, kids have faces they make when they're, concerned they can't do something.
Right.
And I didn't engage with it. I said, don't watch Ben. Here's the order of the muscles. And he did it the first time. First time. I mean, he's not going to win an award for, how exactly he did it, but he did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then by the end of practice, his group, he asked if he could stay when we had some high school students from some private schools in the area who come and train on Sunday mornings. And when I'm in town, and they were there and we were executing, and he asked, can I get back in and I'll stay on the other side of the mats? And I'm like, sure. And then I turn around and here he goes, and his father, of course, was super enthusiastic because he could see already, how much use he was getting out of what he'd been taught. And when I started working with him this morning, I didn't put Ben there and say, okay, this is body leveraging. We're going to teach you this. We talked about his shot. I watched his shot.
Mhm.
I gently showed how that shot was vulnerable. And then Ben, shot his shot, and he could feel the difference, see the difference. So he was
Right.
excited to learn how to do it. And when he was going down the mat, what I really admired about this young man's father, who's also, I think, probably his primary coach, was that he didn't try to stop his kid and make it perfect, or what
Right.
they perceive as perfect. They don't even know.
Mhm.
And that's what so many people do. There's a generational perfectionism, particularly in people 40 years of age and under, that freezes their athletes and children into almost a procrastination state because they feel like if they cannot execute it perfectly, they're going to hear about it in a way that's painful to them emotionally, and they don't want to try at all.
Yeah.
And back to
I
we were
see
talking
that
about
myself.
teaching
Yeah.
body leveraging. I mean, that or in the muscle order, that is something that, I have to speak with people who are on the side of the mat oftentimes is that, please, they start to, talk over top of me. I'm like, please, you don't know what you're saying. And please don't do that. They're doing so much, 80% of 20% of something they've never seen before.
Yeah.
Why don't we celebrate that so this becomes a positive
Right.
memory and they will be enthusiastic to do it again. They, and as the adult or the coach who is dialed into perfectionism, you have to ask why you feel that way.
Yeah. Oh, it's really easy to overcoach these situations and instead of just letting the athletes figure it out. And them figuring it out is so much more valuable than sometimes I think that's almost a sign of almost the more you know, the less you. Some of the best coaches I've watched in the corner say almost nothing most of the time. But when they do say something, it's really important, and their athletes know that. But it's easy when you don't know a lot to overcoach in a situation like that and throw out everything that you know instead of
But
waiting for important times to interject or here's one important thing that's going to fix a lot of what you're doing instead of just throwing out a bunch of of cues
to hear
that
themselves talk,
yeah,
useless
yeah,
information,
right.
right? I think we all understand that. We start at Powerade. Oh, and Robert Kucharzik he was the second match of the night, and I was sitting with his parents, and Eileen said, do you need to be closer so he can hear you? I said, oh, he can hear me, and I'm not going to say anything unless he needs it.
Yeah, right.
And I said three times I said something, and three times it resulted in scoring.
Yeah.
And one of them he like you know, made eyes, made eyes, and uh, it's no great coaches. I like how prep coaches are so, I don't want to use the word grateful because they're great coaches. They don't need me, but
Yeah.
they know I'm enhancing something that this athlete did for 10 years of his life before he showed up on their doorstep. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah.
they're, they're cool about it. Same thing with Wyoming Seminary, with Cornell Robinson. He's so appreciative of every piece of the insight that's available for sure.
All
I
right.
may be getting off the topic here, but
No, this has been great. It's been like I said, I've thought a lot of these things myself. It's good to hear from you a lot of sort of how you introduce this body leveraging to athletes that are they're brand new, and then also the idea that even in parts, you don't necessarily have to immerse yourself in a years long training session for body
no,
leveraging. It's integrating certain movements into technique and picking up things that way is another way to expose athletes to these things. You don't necessarily have to start with doing back sprint handsprings all the way across the mat. Adding a little
no,
heel toe knee to
for
your shot
sure.
is going to make a huge difference in a beginning wrestler's
Those
success.
those muscle orders are incredible. Let's just take two athletes. Tyler Lillard, who's at Indiana University,
Mhm.
just won Midlands. I forgot to put him on the list today.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
won Midlands a few days ago, and
right,
he absolutely body leveraged in every single match. He so body leverages. It's so integral. If I sat down and just broke out every math-based movement he did, it would take me hours
right,
because he executes so many in any match. And when I started with Tyler, we were solely online.
yeah,
And I would teach Tyler, and then he would go through his matches and see where they applied himself. And
mhm,
here he's at IU, and the other day he's FaceTiming me, and he'd made a grid, and he's out there working.
right,
Or Dante Hutchings, who wrestled for Pomona, and he was out many times. Came out for, I don't know, the majority of his free time in the summer between his junior and senior year, and then was out here this summer too. And Dante would go over to the training center at Pomona, and he would be put the phone on, put the FaceTime on, and we would just practice. He would practice. And a lot of these, Ian Morales, same thing.
Right. Yeah.
He would, go over to, he would go over to another high school outside of his high school program in Central Valley of California. And Coach Vanny is the coach there. Tim Vanny, who's a just incredible human being. And Tim would let him body leverage over there and use sequential muscle order. And if you're somebody who wrestled with me your whole life and you're not body leveraging or doing the isometric, math-based holds or some of the things we do, and your wrestling is degrading, that's why.
Right.
Because what was the foundation of everything they've done is no longer part. So they feel they want to execute the way they used to previously, but their muscles haven't been used in that order. So it's shaky for them. It's hard for them to execute that way, unfortunately. But
Yeah, without that
athletes who
practice,
want to
you
do
can't
it
use your
find
body in that way.
ways to practice.
Yeah.
Right? What coach cares if you come in early or come in late or come in, but there's a fine line there between are you a check the box person?
Right.
Or are you going to learn this so you can execute it and you want to execute it? A check the box person would say, well, I already went to camp, or I'm already practicing for 2 hours, or I'm already. But if that student or that athlete was a student and they needed to study harder for math than maybe they did for language arts or for history, as people in authority in their lives, we would expect them to do that. You couldn't just say, I went to class. You can't check the box and say, I just went to class. And that in that time frame, I didn't retain the material. So it's okay. But there are a lot of people who train their kids and they go all these places and like they'll say to me, oh, well, we just trained with so-and-so. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, we were in the same room, and so there was a coach who was breaking down what you were doing and what they were doing and cross-referencing and helping you all execute better together? Or were you all just wrestling with each other so the other coaches could learn how to beat you?
Yeah, we talk a lot in this sport about mat time and things, but if it's not deliberate practice with some intentional progress being made to make someone a better wrestler, then mat time and the number of matches that people wrestle isn't necessarily a good indicator as to how good someone is or how good they can be.
For sure. And remember back when what was the first summer you were there? 2013?
I think so, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, 2013. So in 2013, we started in 2000. I started really earlier than that, but in a high school room, probably about 2009, we would have this Sunday live wrestling. So one day, everybody would come and we would wrestle live for 2 hours. You've been to, you've been to the Sunday live. So we would have them during camps when you were there and match nights and stuff. But we did not do that every day. That was not the training. The training was during the week, and then we would do this live wrestling in order to see if we were able to integrate it and execute it and refine from there, right? So if, like, say you're wide legging out, but you kept getting pushed back on, well, we would go back to your body leveraging and watch you wide leg and make sure you're using your trail leg, calf, and hamstring correctly. And then the next time they would execute it in a match, it would be a better go. So we would have, by the time you were there, we would have, what, 200 people on a Sunday?
The warehouse was packed, yeah.
200 people would drive 5-6 hours one way to come. And then we would execute, and then we'd go back to training. But when we trained during the week, we did some situational live when we were doing technique, but it was predominantly math-based movement than the technique that went with it. It wasn't 5 days of learning how to use your muscles in the correct order. It was always applied to technique. Right. So you could take something home with you, and those systems were the same. But a lot of people, they go, well, I trained with so-and-so, or I trained here. Oh, what did you do? Oh, well, we wrestled live.
Yeah, I've always felt
Well,
we spend way too much time live wrestling in practices where you're not, especially, and it's hard to get wrestlers to understand that in practice, winning and losing doesn't necessarily make a difference. It's are you wrestling in a way that's going to get you better at wrestling? Because that, what happens during a live go in practice, the only important thing is that you did something during that live go that's helping you get better at wrestling, not necessarily that you beat the guy that you wrestle every single day.
I remember specifically Chris Creason. Chrissy was, we went to, out to Winchester, Virginia, to a practice. And, there was some situational live and live wrestling. And Chrissy was trying to execute something new and he wasn't focused on winning. And there was a really nice young man there who I think was a Virginia state champ, maybe, around Chrissy's weight, 135, 140. And, whatever. And then 6 months later, 4 months later, we were at a dual tournament and Chrissy wrestled him and, won dominantly, like
Mhm.
12-1 or something. And the athlete was so surprised that his mom approached me and she said, well, that's such a surprise since my son, beat him so badly in the practice room. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not sure we ever wrestled a match. Oh, yes. When you were here, this is what happened. And
Right.
neither the athlete I was working with or me as the coach was concentrating on winning in that position. We were in that flurry, that 40 minutes, 40 seconds. We were focused on, is this piece of technique working
Yeah.
and how are we going to execute it better? And I literally was saying that in the moment, but some kids are trained that they have to win every go.
Yeah. Right.
So, and then, but when they drill, it's very soft and partial. And I drill the athletes I work with very, it's the 7-Eleven movements
Mhm.
and with accuracy and congruent trajectory and torque and strength that we would in a live match. And we do situational live a little bit softer.
Yeah.
But that's my perspective, right? That's my
Right.
perspective. And I think sometimes I think some people have their athletes go live so often is because they can't get them better. So there comes a point in most athlete coaches' career, if the athlete isn't progressing, where the coach, goes so far to try to help them with every piece of knowledge they have with sincerity, and then they're out of knowledge. So automatically it becomes the athlete's fault. They're not going hard enough. They're
Yeah. It
not.
just becomes a grind at that point. Are you working hard enough instead of,
Yes, yes. And are you lifting enough? And are you, but in actuality, it may be that maybe this athlete could use a
yeah,
little toughness,
yeah, yeah.
but a lot of it would be is this coach has maxed out their knowledge base
Hmm.
and nobody's providing them time or money or sponsoring them to go learn new technique or new things. I'm not judging.
Right. Right.
I'm just stating,
Yeah. Yeah.
that it'd be the same as if, we went to a hospital and there was a real emergency and there was only a nurse practitioner. And even though a nurse practitioner is off, and she's probably not going to break a bone and reset it. We would have to wait for the orthopedic surgeon,
Hmm.
right? But this in wrestling, so many schools don't put money into it. Club programs, when they raise money, it's usually for gear or trying to get people to tournaments. It's rarely does a program go, ooh, we have an extra 3 grand. Where could we send our coach this summer to learn more information? And even with that, they have to consider they need to not only pay for the coach to go, they need to pay the coach for the income they're going to lose
Right.
from
Yeah.
taking time off work to go.
Hmm.
It's a very hard climb and a very slippery slope. And I have a lot of respect for coaches who aren't in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. No, this has been great. Like I said, I was excited to hear you talk a little bit about integrating body leveraging into practices, the connections to technique. It was good to hear some of the recent successes of athletes who have been utilizing body leveraging for a long time, and I guess
or recently, and they're still
yeah,
having
right,
success.
right. And I guess the big thing coming up is we've opened up summer camp signups, so
Oh,
we've
yeah,
got
yeah.
early registrations for summer camp to spend a week or two or three out in Virginia. So we've got wrestlers
Yeah, I
signing
have a
up
few things to
on
say
that.
about that. So the 40% off, our biggest discount ends on close of business, close of, after midnight on January 15th. And
Mhm.
then, and also it is just the large amount of interest there's been, of people reaching out from around the country to inquire if it's possible for us to do camps at other locations.
Mhm.
And I would say for sure there's going to be one in, in the St. Louis area. Where, do you remember the city that I was in December? It was a, begin with an F. It was right out, I flew into St.
Fenton?
Louis Airport.
Yeah,
It was at St. Pius.
yeah. I
Um,
want to say
yeah, St.
Fenton,
Pius
the
Fifth
city.
in, I want to say Fester or Fest, I'm not
I
sure.
I think it's
But
Fenton,
I
but
do
I'll
believe
have
we're
to
going to
look.
be
Yeah.
there this summer. And then so many other places have reached out, and then we'll be doing those as well.
Ah, that's awesome. And like you had said earlier, having someone come out and teach this stuff over the course of a day or 2 year, all over the place all year. And so there's definitely opportunities to learn
Yeah, we're
directly from
everywhere. I
them in
think
person and
I'm going to
learn online.
California on for a week. And the 17th, I'm going to be doing a clinic in Los Banos, and I'll
Okay.
be up at Gilroy and at
Yeah.
AKA, of course,
All
while I'm
right.
there. And then I'm back in Louisville, Kentucky in February.
Hmm.
In Florida, I think I'm doing, then I'll be going to Georgia to do a clinic, and then two clinics in Florida.
Okay.
And, I'm gonna get with, Captain America and get to Brazil as quick as possible.
All right.
So that's beneficial for me and beneficial for them. But
Yeah.
one other thing I wanted to say about the summer early registration is that in the past, as you know, we've allowed for open early registration, meaning as many people signed up we could take,
Hmm.
and that's not the case anymore. We can
Okay.
only take so many at each of the early discount pricing.
Right.
So I
Right.
just
Okay.
want to encourage people not to wait to the last minute if they can, because they could end up being blocked.
Okay. Or at
You,
least have to
you know,
register at the higher price point based on limits to
yes, that's
registration
correct.
groups. Yeah. Yeah.
You say that way better than me.
No, definitely. So check out wrestlingprep.com. All the info for upcoming clinics as well as camps this summer are there. So you can check out the info there, register right on the website, and we look forward to seeing some of you there at camp. So again, great conversations. Always good to hear from you, Coach. And we'll talk to everyone soon. Have a great beginning of your year, next portion of your season. All right, bye.